How to get rid of chronic feelings of guilt. In this video, we will talk about feelings of guilt and how they affect a person's life, how they manifest, and how to finally get rid of this feeling of guilt. Often, it can be present in a person's life to such an extent that it prevents them from living a happy life. Where can it originate from? Feelings of guilt can actually form as early as infancy, when a small child is completely dependent on their parents, and for the child, the parents represent their life. That is, they provide shelter, nourishment, safety, and survival. So, if parents give the child an understanding that life is safe, then the child develops a healthy outlook on the world. But if parents behave in a certain way that breaks a personality, such as instilling feelings of guilt in childhood by saying things like, "You are bad, you upset me," and so on, a child grows up with the understanding that they are doing something wrong, and feelings of guilt begin to form for many from early childhood, but later it manifests into serious problems. So now let's talk about how this feeling of guilt can manifest and how to recognize it. First sign is an apology. For example, if you enter a doctor's office or a teacher's and say, "Excuse me, sorry, can I ask you something? Excuse me, sorry, can I come in?" When you apologize in advance, before asking or inquiring about something, think about what you are asking forgiveness for. The first sign that you have a huge feeling of guilt is that you often apologize for no reason. Sometimes moving on, "I don't deserve happiness." Well, such a thought might enter the mind of a girl or a boy who's been burdened with this feeling of guilt since childhood, especially when their mom would say, "You upset me. You did that, and I was very upset." Phrases like this made the child live in a way that wouldn't upset anyone, meaning they were only accepted when they were good. If this boy does something wrong, it means he is bad, and he is not accepted. For example, the girl grows up, she starts to endure a husband who is a scoundrel, and she doesn't tell her mom that she is feeling bad. Perhaps a man raises his hand or treats her very poorly. For instance, if she is in an abusive relationship, she's afraid to tell her mom about it, so as not to upset her mom and to avoid feeling even more guilt. There is an underlying thought here that one cannot defend their own interests, cannot be happy, and cannot live their happy life, because even this thought itself is sinful. In other words, I cannot act as I want. I can't live this life the way I want. I have to live the way I should, a way that will be good for others, but not for me. And at the moment when I try to live my happy life, that is, somehow do something for myself, a feeling of guilt immediately arises, preventing me from doing that. Moving on. Another sign that you have deeply rooted feelings of guilt is aggression. Aggression is, again, a form of expressing guilt, meaning that something was left unsaid to someone at some moment, and it has settled in the subconscious, deep within the person. And now this situation resonates in a person's life, meaning that when something similar happens, the person cannot express what they dislike, cannot voice what they don't like in their relationships, cannot say what they don't like, for example, at work, and aggression arises. Aggression can manifest not only as physical actions or shouting, but it can also be expressed, for example, in the condemnation of other people. When a person starts to speak poorly about others, about colleagues, about some close ones, relatives, or friends, claiming that everyone around is bad, it seems like a preemptive attack to clear their own name, just so that no one will target the person who is attacking, to project something bad about oneself onto others. Everyone around is to blame, everyone around is bad, and I am just so good. Although deep down, a person is indeed so afraid of making mistakes that they do not allow themselves to make any errors. He understands that he has no right to make a mistake, and this, again, can often stem from childhood when parents scolded him very harshly for something. The child grows up and realizes, I must not make a mistake under any circumstances. I can't do anything wrong otherwise. For example, my parents might reject me, and for a small child, that once was their whole life, because parents are everything, blood, food, and safety. In that moment, I could lose all of that. This remains at the subconscious level. That is, when a person understands that they do not have the right to make a mistake, and they are afraid of making one, they start looking for mistakes, even the smallest hints, in everyone around them, just so that no one notices that this person has made a mistake themselves. And another indicator is the increasing anxiety. That is, if you are constantly, everything seems fine, but this anxiety is growing. Thus, The subconscious may choose a model as a channel through which your guilt manifests as anxiety, meaning your subconscious slightly unloads your psyche and relieves tension. But if there is anxiety, it may be another indication that deep sense of guilt has settled within you. Again, anxiety can manifest when I want something, but I am not allowed to have it. And this internal conflict between desires and what is formed within a person, that is, between the perceptions, for example, about the lives of parents. Parents, for example, did not allow spending, meaning that one needs to live and save, collect for something. For example, this girl or boy wants to buy something for themselves, and then a tension arises, a feeling of guilt that I can't buy something because this model comes from childhood, and here the feeling of guilt emerges. If I buy something that I want, then I feel guilty. If I don't buy, anxiety increases. This is how it can manifest. So now we'll talk about how to get rid of this feeling of guilt. And first, it needs to be acknowledged, not run away from it. In order to get rid of something, you need to dive into it, immerse yourself completely so that you can process it and prevent that feeling from poisoning or ruining your life in the future. So let's dive in and acknowledge all of our guilt. Write down on a piece of paper what you feel guilty about. I feel guilty towards my mom for not living up to her expectations regarding clothing. I feel guilty towards my mom for rarely calling her and not visiting her often. I feel guilty towards my boyfriend because I treated him this way and that way. I feel guilty towards my girlfriend, my friend, my grandma, my grandpa, anyone. You write down all the guilt you have, and you write something. It's a kind of therapy. And at that moment, you can handle a lot on your own, even without a third party, without a psychologist. When we write, we are as open as possible. And in that moment, things may surface that you wouldn't mentally reach. So write down all your guilt, and you see this guilt. It will become clear to you, but you need to work on. You will see a real picture of what is happening to you. Next, what needs to be done. For example, if you have identified a feeling of guilt, choose from the points where you are at fault that you can correct this moment, meaning right now. What can I fix? For example, you hurt your grandma or grandpa, or said something unkind to your boyfriend or mom. That is, you can apologize now and start taking action. Ask for forgiveness from those you owe an apology to. And it is very important to forgive yourself. That is, at the moment when you ask for forgiveness. And by the way, many people are afraid to ask for forgiveness in order not to appear weak. The ability to apologize actually shows that a person is truly strong in spirit. So don't be afraid to apologize, and don't be afraid to acknowledge your mistakes at some point. You are making this contribution not for others, but for yourself. That is, to live a quality life, a better life. So apologize to everyone, and in that moment, forgive yourself. So part of the work is already done. You have apologized to those you could apologize to. There are certain moments for which you felt guilt. Moving on, do not suppress this feeling. When you give in to this feeling, spend some time in your guilt and analyze it. And yes, it can be difficult right away, and there may be a feeling of regression, meaning you might feel as if this guilt has somehow increased. But when you do not resist this feeling, when you do not try to escape from it, then you can take control of this emotion, you can learn to live with it, and you can move out of this feeling of guilt by separating where you are from what has been imposed on you from the outside. And at that moment, when you separate yourself from what has been imposed on you, you can learn to live a qualitatively better life. In order to cope with emotions, you first need to give in to them, dive into them, spend time with them, and then you can take control of them. Next, you discuss something with your partner and, for example, you suddenly started yelling out of nowhere, and now you feel guilty for having shouted. Try to figure out what happened at that moment and why you started yelling. That is, it seems that your partner hasn't said anything to you, but a scream arose from your side. Let's analyze this example. Perhaps you are not entirely honest with yourself. For example, you may have sensed some cooling from your partner as if they started to distance themselves. And you reacted by shouting because you began to feel that the emotions and feelings in the relationship were starting to fade a bit. So if you are honest and work through your feelings, then you understand which problem needs to be addressed. It's not just about the moment when you yelled, but about finding the reason behind it. So if you realize that you are currently lacking attention, lacking emotions, or feeling distant, and if at that moment you start talking, building a constructive dialogue, and correctly establishing the cause and effect relationships of where things originated, Then you will have fewer problems in life and fewer situations where you react out of nowhere. You shout and relationships, for example, fall apart even more, and you don't understand how this happens. Therefore, build logical connections. That is, I shouted just now. Why? Because I feel hurt right now, or I have been feeling something for a long time, but still haven't mustered the courage to, for example, talk about it. And so I do not admit to myself that there is any problem. So if we really delve into the issues, diving deep instead of just seeing the tip of the iceberg, then many problems can be avoided. In other words, there won't be that feeling of guilt. Instead, more harmonious and happier relationships will be built. Next, it is very important. Forgive yourself. Acknowledge, for example, that you did everything you could to fix certain situations. You apologize to those you needed to apologize to. For example, you have worked on yourself and accepted that you will no longer argue over trivial matters, but instead will seek the underlying reasons for why things happen. At that moment, you will accept that you will live your life differently. I forgive myself. I did everything I could to fix what happened. And now your life can change for the better. What else is very important to do? Start keeping a feelings journal. This way, you will easily begin to track your feelings of guilt. Again, writing is therapy. What feelings are you experiencing right now? Start a journal and begin writing. I feel ashamed right now. I am currently experiencing a sense of guilt. For what reason? Why did it arise? And try to build a chain of thoughts. I wanted to do something for myself just now, and I felt a sense of guilt. Where did this feeling of guilt come from? Why has it settled in my head? Because I was always told that I couldn't do it, because it was always forbidden to me. I want to, but I can't. And when you give in to that feeling, when you describe where it comes from, then you, and keep it under control, understanding its origins, and you begin to live a completely different quality of life. That's all I have for this video. This was Alice Bardomska. I hope for your likes and subscriptions. Please write in the comments what you would like to discuss in my new videos. Don't forget to hit the bell icon. Goodbye, everyone.